Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy, episode number 96. I'm Stephen Barr.
Hey everyone, I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and we are getting closer to our 100th episode. So thanks again for sticking around and letting us present this week after week. We thoroughly enjoy it. We have yet another week of some really exciting news and a really exciting set of new tools that we're going to explore today.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a jam-packed week. It's been incredible. How have you been? I know you've been traveling. Are you back?
Yes, I'm back in Chennai. I was in Dubai for a week, and that was a good, fun, detour from the day-to-day routine over here. But yeah, I mean, Dubai is as exciting as ever. It's growing like crazy. Traffic is insane. Yeah, the usual chaos of Dubai. But yeah, it was a good, fun trip with the family. The kids got to enjoy, all their old friends and renew all those bonds. So it was really amazing.
That's great. Now, I've only
What about
been
you?
once, which is the first time we met, and that was
Yes,
a blast. That was a really fun trip. First time we met
absolutely.
in real life.
Right. How have things been with you?
Really, really well. Okay, so in Seattle, it has crossed 70 degrees, which is what, 17? And we
70,
are
yeah, about 17.
we might as well be in Hawaii in July. It is everyone's outside soaking up as much sun. We are all vitamin D deprived here, so we're just soaking in the sun, spending as much time outside as we can. It's been a blast, and we all know, okay, April could still be gray and cloudy and a bit miserable. Maybe even part of May could be that way too. So we're going to take it while we can. So it's been a really nice weekend. I've got a little bit, if you can believe it, I got sunburned in March in Seattle, but some creative lighting and a bit of foundation covers that up. It's been good.
Neat.
I've also been doing a bit of 3D printing.
Nice.
So that's been a blast. Let's see. Actually, that I want to show. I used AI to design something. So I've got these lights and cameras, and my office becomes a bit of a obstacle course of tripods and cables and whatnot. So I'm trying to clean that up. And so I've got this idea for mounting a unistrut, which is just a bent rolled piece of metal, a metal
Right.
channel onto the ceiling, and then building a trolley for it that I can have things slide up and down the trolley. Now I want to 3D print something and then use these skateboard bearings and then fit them in. And so the question with 3D printing, of course, when you're doing interacting with other parts, is tolerances. So
Right.
first I printed this one that's exactly the inner diameter, and
Mm.
this one has a reasonable fit. This is actually, it's not as good as it sounds. Like the bearing can
That
slide on
click
and off.
sounded really good.
Yeah, it's not that good. But yeah, the bearing slides on. It's okay. Then I have this one that I printed out at minus 0.01 millimeters, and this one's a bit too loose. And so I thought,
Got
okay,
it.
this is a really cumbersome way of getting the tolerances. So I thought, what I really need to do is make a tolerance tester.
Mm.
So then I thought, well, I could do it, or I can get generative AI to do it. So let me share my screen real quick. I want to show you the process that I followed and what came out. And now it is printing out behind me as we speak. Let
Nice.
me share my screen. So I went into GPT-4 and I said, this is a little bit of back and forth. Okay, I said I'm using 3D printing for R8 2RS bearing. So this is the skateboard bearing. And I
Got
would like
it.
a 3D printed tolerance tester for R8 2RS bearings. And I described it. I want a base plate, a shaft that says nominal, which is the inner diameter of the bearing. And note, I didn't
Got it.
specify what the inner diameter was. I just said the kind of bearing it was. And then I said that I want, shafts invariance differences from that. And I realized those were too fine measurements, so I iterated back and forth. But what this
Nice.
did was it generated me a bit of OpenSCAD code. Um,
Nice.
and of course, I had to go back and forth for debugging purposes, but it was much faster than I could have done. And let me show you what the result was. So
Nice.
I've got a little board here. This is my nominal measurement, and this is plus 0.1 millimeters, plus 0.2, plus 0.3, all the way up to plus 0.4 millimeters. So that way, depending on the variation in the bearing, the variation in the filament, I can
Got it.
test, see exactly which one I want. And all this is automated, so I'll build another one of these that has 0.5 all the way up to plus 1 millimeter. And there's going to be
Nice.
variations in my print quality, in the filament, in the infill, but this is going to help me. And so eventually, once I've got this worked out, I'm going to print out a little trolley with 2 of these bearings on either side, and I'll probably have 4. And these bearings are going to sit in a track, and then I can roll my lights and my camera. And the other thing I've been working on, speaking of chains here, I'm working on a little cable chain.
Oh, nice.
So then I just need to print out another 10 feet or so. But then I should have my HDMI cable and the power cable for the camera nicely in one of these things. And so when I slide it down, the power cable for the lights, when I slide these around, it will be nicely kept. I think it's the really neat part about this was using AI and working with it, right? So I didn't do it totally blindly. I had to give it a little bit of direction. It's OpenSCAD is a little bit esoteric, and so it tried to apply some concepts that didn't work. So I still had to know the fundamentals of the language, but with a little bit of nudging and prodding, I was able to get it to generate a useful part. And I don't know OpenSCAD, the language. I know what it's capable of, but I don't really know it. I don't have a working knowledge of it. So being able to just type it into GPT-4 in this case, and use that was really handy.
That's really neat. Yeah, I think doing these tolerances is a classic example of where you could actually use AI to efficiently and quickly get to a solution. And there's so many examples of that. Every day we end up using, some of these conversations to come up with solutions for a lot of the stuff that we're literally doing every day. So yeah, definitely. I think the big difference from say 2 years ago is earlier we used to go to Google to find a solution that someone else has already created and then try and adapt it to our use case. And today the default approach is to go to an OpenAI chat or a Claude 3 chat and then start typing in your question over there and getting a custom fitted answer for you. So, and you can interact with the AI to get exactly what you need, not something that someone else did and then you have to adapt it to your use case.
And I'm still amazed that I did pull out my calipers and I measured the inner diameter, but then just as an experiment, I thought, let me just specify this is a very well-known bearing, and I didn't have to measure it myself. I just said this is what I'm using, and that's a well-defined specification that's already out there. So let it join the relevant bits of data. And even saying at one point, I said, look, I want to 3D print this, and I want labels that will be in a different color filament so they stand out.
Right.
And they didn't have to describe, extrude it 2 millimeters off of the base plate. I just said what I want it to do.
Right. No, I think that's the beauty of the LLMs. The more we use it, the more use cases we're going to come up with. So couldn't be more excited.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's jump into our AWS news reviews. Okay, first article of the day, AWS Batch now supports alerts to detect and react to jobs stuck in a runnable state. Now, it gives you a CloudWatch event. So what happened before and why is this important?
Okay, so usually the way you use AWS Batch is that you have this queue and then you put in a bunch of different jobs. Now, the job that's at the head of the queue can invariably get stuck in the runnable state. It's just running. You are wasting away resources and money as you're not processing any of your other stuff. Parameter when you're creating a job, that way when a particular job is spending more than that X amount of time, you will get an alert that you can then use to take action, either take out the job because it might have been misconfigured or it might not have permissions or one of various different reasons why jobs kind of fail. You can then take the job out of the queue, let the other jobs process, fix this and put it back in the queue. So definitely simplifies the life of most administrators who are running these massive jobs. It allows them to take action when jobs fail and saves a ton of money.
Neat. All right. So how many clouds?
I would give this a 4 cloud and simplifies for sure. Exactly.
In general, who uses batch versus, say, populating an SQS queue and then having Lambda work on it? What are the applications of batch versus that approach?
So batch is typically used for very heavy compute intensive, long running jobs. So if you're running for, say, I mean, let's say end of day transaction reconciliation, which isn't a one transaction thing. It's not a, sub millisecond or just a few second kind of job. This is something that's got to, work across a massive amounts of data, require a massive amount of compute, but it probably runs for an hour or two to produce the outcome. So those are all scenarios where you would definitely want to use AWS batch and not something like Lambda.
So once you have this job that comes back, you have this CloudWatch event and it says my AWS batch didn't start. Could you then plug it into, say, Claude 3 Opus to say, I just got this error, figure out why, and then have maybe a LangChain tool that can resubmit the modified job back to the queue?
I think most certainly. You're already starting to see a number of use cases where the LLMs are doing a brilliant job of taking error messages and telling you exactly what needs to be changed. Now, the way you would use this is typically you would need an agent that is capable of looking at code, modifying code, doing all of that stuff. It wouldn't be just the bare LLM itself. But with an agent, you can absolutely go ahead, fix the job, and then submit it back in the queue.
So you'd want an agent, and also you'd want, I guess in LangChain parlance, you'd want a tool, right?
Yes.
Something that had access to the AWS, in this case, the AWS Batch API.
Correct.
So when you look at Amazon AWS Batch, how does that fit in versus EMR? Like if you were to do either a MapReduce or even write a custom Spark job, how does Batch fit in?
These are all different techniques to handle very large workloads, right? Batch happens to be one of them. Where if you have a simple, let's say you have a tool that actually does processing, and it's basically a ready-made binary that's running on an EC2 instance and is processing your workload. Great, batch is a perfect example of that. EMR is a very specific algorithm where you write custom functions that do the map function and then the reduce. That's one approach to doing it. You can also write Spark jobs to process a bunch of this data. If you're streaming data, it's a different way of handling it as well. So there are just different approaches to doing it. Typically, you have a processor, it's a binary that's been there around for a while. You want a massive EC2 machine that's just processing tons of data, producing an output, and then you get done with it. That's a perfect example for where you would use AWS Batch.
A long time ago, I was helping a professor with the simulation, and that was, I think, 2006. And we just had, it might have been 2007. We had EC2, we had SQS, and we were...
Yeah, 2007 is probably when that was.
And we were trying to run a binary. It was for a programming language called Gauss. And we were trying to run this binary just with different sets of parameters, collect all the results into S3. This would have been a perfect way to do it. I had to write a bit of Perl code, if you can believe it, to coordinate populating an SQS queue and then making sure that the cluster shut itself down at the time.
Yeah,
Batch would have been the way to go.
I agree. No, AWS Batch is definitely the way to process those kind of workloads.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, this is a big announcement. Anthropic's Claude 3 Haiku model is now available on Bedrock. Of course, last week we had Sonnet that came out. That was the middle in the cost to sophistication intelligence curve. Haiku is we say it's the economy version, the light version.
I'd say the fastest version, which also happens to be very light and very cost effective at the same time.
Interesting. Okay, so Haiku is when you want low latency. It might not be the most complicated question in the world, but okay, this is low latency, inexpensive. Do you think that most people are going to default to Haiku in their uses, or when would you use Haiku versus Sonnet?
So I have a slightly different model of when to use what, which LLM version for your use cases. Now, if you have a one-off chatbot, right, and the end consumer is a human, my belief is use the most intelligent version, because you're not going to have a massive volume of conversation. You're going to have relatively simple, straightforward, but you need that extra intelligence. You need that extra context, and a little bit of latency to get really amazing answers is not such a bad thing. I mean, imagine a place where you're trying to replace a human at the other end of the conversation with an LLM. I would pick something like Opus to do those, and it's not going to be very, costly to run something like that. Then at the other end of the spectrum is when I have to generate tons of code, when I have to analyze tons and tons of data. I want something that's fast. I want something with low latency. I want something that is cost effective, because I'm going to be running millions of transactions through it. That's a perfect example where you would default to something like Haiku, which is a very capable model. It's just that it's not got the breadth of a very detailed or in-depth conversation that you would get with Opus. So, but for things like generating code, Haiku is actually really good, in my experience. So I would default to something like Haiku for examples like that, where I'm going to be using tons and tons of tokens, and I want it to be cost effective. With Sonnet, Sonnet falls in the middle, and there are two possible use cases. Number one is you're having a conversation with Opus, but there are some examples of things that Sonnet could absolutely handle. And so if you created a simple router kind of mechanism where some of the simple, easy stuff goes over to Sonnet, you can actually make those conversations pretty effective. You have lower latency with Sonnet compared to Opus, so you'll get simple answers faster. The other scenario is where Haiku, for example, if it doesn't really meet the quality bar you need, then you can basically upgrade up to a Sonnet to get specific answers. But I think for the most part, you're going to, as we evolve into creating more complicated use cases, having some sort of a router that's going to be able to judge which model is best suited for what kind of a question or a workload is going to become more and more commonplace.
That makes a lot of sense. And so at the router model, we'll be able to understand, okay, what models do you have access to? What types of questions do you expect at this endpoint? And then how do you dispatch them effectively, balancing efficiency and effectiveness of the answers, cost, and those are all trade-offs that you can make based on the economics of your situation.
Yeah, and in most cases, you can actually write up this router in Haiku. So I would use something like Haiku to actually do this definition that I just gave you, and have Haiku decide which way or which LLM would be best suited for that particular model. A model like Haiku would be really good at doing that. And with a few one-shot learning examples, I think this would be quite a breeze.
And it was interesting, shifting gears, it was interesting that the Anthropic and the coordination with Bedrock, right? Anthropic offers their own hosted service, but also you can use it with Amazon Bedrock. Bedrock support is first class. It's not a thing that Amazon had to scramble on after the fact. This is a first class offering.
I agree. I'm just wondering why Opus is taking longer for Bedrock to kind of deploy and get out there, which is effectively going to be their most advanced model. So Opus is still being held back. Yeah. So hopefully we will see that happen next week or soon enough.
I did a test with Haiku. I asked it to write a haiku about itself. And it gave it a pretty good one. Circuits spark to life. Artificial mind creates generative art. Pretty good. And I used Darko's Bedrust program. Bedrust is for calling Bedrock with Rust. We called that. We used that program to talk to Haiku on Bedrock. He's been adding support as new models come out. He's adding support right away. And the Claude 3 models had a slightly different change in their API using what's called the Messages API.
Correct.
So it took it took LangChain a couple of days, but everyone's now caught up, and all the most popular frameworks can now talk to Bedrock directly.
And even the API in general for Claude 3 are pretty straightforward, pretty easy, with probably the exception of the functions, capability where you can call functions. For some reason, Anthropic has decided to use XML as the language for defining the functions. Now, the last time I saw someone use XML to define this was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. The use of XML for definition now just seems really outdated. So I don't know why they picked XML as their function definition approach. It just makes things more complicated. And for that reason, they've had to generate another SDK on top of it so that it makes it easier for developers to use it with simple languages like Python. So I think that's probably my only criticism of Anthropic's implementation details, their choice of XML. But yeah.
Interesting. That's a bit quirky.
This is OpenAI's function calling. Relatively straightforward to use. You can actually do parallel function calling. This is pretty neat. There's a pretty neat example over here that this has been out for months. So I think Claude kind of needed a similar mechanism because, like the OpenAI models, Claude's models don't have access to the internet. So you need to give the LLM some mechanism of pulling data, pulling relevant context from external data sources without you having to do this, yourself. So function calling is an incredibly powerful tool. This is how you define functions, all with XML. And then this is how you have to define the function calling format.
Okay,
again,
I'm
all
seeing
in XML.
The OpenAI. So now can you switch over to...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so there's...
So this is the way you actually define your function. And then this is the function calling format. And then this is an example. As you can see, it is not the easiest or the cleanest definition to see or read or work with. The good thing is that somewhere down here, they had there's actually an SDK that they released some time ago that makes it a little easier to work with this stuff. Here it is. Okay. So this is a tool that allows you to write simple Python functions, but you have to derive from this base class called base tools. And as long as your functions derive from that, it will figure out how to deal with calling that function as and when necessary.
Got it.
So it's a little more complicated than I would have liked from a design standpoint. In comparison, I'd say, OpenAI's solution is a lot more neater. It's a lot cleaner than Claude's implementation.
At the end of the day, if it works, it works. But
yes,
surprising.
Things will evolve. It's early days still.
Now, you reminded me of this class. Have you seen this classic Stack Overflow? So this is a question. It was asked 14 years ago, and it was about using regular expressions to parse XHTML. And there was a classic response that got answered to this. That you can't parse XHTML with regex because HTML can't be parsed with regex. Regex is not a tool that can be used to correctly parse HTML. And then it keeps going down. The force of regex and XHTML together in the same conceptual space will destroy your mind like so much watery putty. If you parse HTML with regex, you are giving in to them and their blasphemous ways which doom us all to inhuman toil for the one whose name cannot be expressed in a basic multilingual plane. And it just gets crazier from there. So it's just, do not parse XHTML with regular expressions. It cannot be done. Yeah. Don't try it. And I love that answer. It's just a classic thing. Yeah. So XML, like I said, the libraries are now very mature, so it's fine. We can deal with it. It's a surprising choice. Okay. Let's take a quick break and move on to the next one. Okay. On EFS now supports 20 gigabytes per second of throughput. What's the impact of this? What was the limit before? And how does this change people's potential usage of EFS?
Okay, EFS just keeps getting better and better. So earlier, the limit was 10 gigabytes per second for read throughput and 3 gigabytes per second for write throughput. That's now upgraded to 20 gigabytes per second for reads and 5 gigabytes per second for writes. And that's a big deal. EFS continues to become more useful as a shared file system across multiple different EC2 instances. So it's easy to dump all your data into one file system, something that you'd be used to, running, on an NFS share historically on your on-prem data center. Invariably, you have to use tools that rely on file system operations, right? If you are writing your own little tool that did processing, yes, you should probably pull the data from S3, which is probably the right way to do it. But when you're already using tools that third parties have written that process your data and rely on the file system operations, that's where EFS shines. EFS will allow you to mount in one place and have multiple different consumers of the same data and operate on it as if it was a local file system.
All right, how do you rate this one?
I would give this a 4 and a simplifies.
Now, I'm just looking at the documentation here. It's available in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 regions. Just think about the hardware that had to be put in place to double the performance on, and these are big regions. I mean, US East 1, US West 2, the Ohio region. These are big core regions. Think about the amount of hardware that had to be changed and swapped out. I mean, these regions have been around for a long time now. And to now say, okay, whatever hardware is powering EFS, we can now support twice as fast. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, EFS has a bunch of dedicated hardware specifically optimizing networking, as well as disk read speeds and disk write speeds, and they've done a pretty amazing job of constantly pushing the limits of what that hardware can do.
DevOps rejoice. Experience 40% faster stack creation with CloudFormation. Now, if you've been deployed a CloudFormation template and you're sitting that page, you're watching it deploy, and then at 90% it rolls back, and you think, "Oh, I made a mistake." Right? This is going to speed up your iteration times pretty substantially.
Yeah. So there is actually a subtle element of this new feature that they just added, which is configuration complete event. So typically in a stack, you only had the create in progress and the create complete. In between there, sometimes it helps to know when your configuration changes are complete, because that's when you know that everything is up and running, especially when you have updates, when you have certain kinds of creations. The configuration complete basically gives you a trigger to go look at stuff, even though the full checks that actually run and take a bunch of time are not yet complete. So you could potentially get started with looking at the resources, working with the resources a lot before the full validation of all the resources is done.
Okay, so simplifying it, once it hits configuration complete, it worked. It's not going to roll back.
Yes.
Or it
correct.
Most likely won't, right? Unless something extremely catastrophic happens, your region
Correct.
gets struck by lightning.
It's a bolt of lightning. What did you say? A bolt of lightning.
Correct. Or, for example, if the health checks don't, turn healthy over a period of time, then it might decide to roll back. But it's a rare event, right? And for most scenarios, you don't have to wait to make sure that every resource has their health checks all working for a certain period of time. That's what causes such delays in the CloudFormation templates. Now, once you know that the configuration is complete, you can go start using it right away. And if it doesn't work, great. Just wait for a few more minutes and then get started. But in 9 out of 10 cases, you'd probably be ready to get started on it right away.
It is an interesting article that it kind of combines these two announcements, the configuration complete and also the 40% faster. I'm surprised that the 40% faster part only got literally half a sentence.
Yes.
That's all that they talk about it. That's a pretty big accomplishment. I thought it would at least deserve a whole sentence. And I would need to say how they accomplished this.
The key here is that this is still a shortcut, right? This is not really, I wouldn't say that this is AWS's defined way of doing it. In an ideal scenario, you get started with using your resources as only when the stack creation is complete. It's not like they've shortened the time that it takes to finish up the stack creation, because 40% of the time is just spent waiting to make sure that all the health checks and everything else and the verifications are complete. So it's not like they've actually shrunk the time. They just create another event that allows you to operate in a slightly hackish way.
Okay, so maybe I'm misreading this, because the way I read it is AWS CloudFormation improved its stack creation speed by up to 40%, and introduced this new event. So you're saying that they're coupled, and it's not that EC2 instances are booting faster.
Yeah.
And okay, so the same CloudFormation template, beginning to end, is going to take the same amount of time.
Correct.
But you might have this configuration complete. Say if it took 10 minutes, it'll still take 10 minutes end to end, but you're going to get this configuration complete 6 minutes in that says, okay, you could possibly start using it. So it's not
correct.
Okay.
So this makes it possible for users who know that their validation steps and the health checks and all are not necessary for certain kinds of resources. They can absolutely just go ahead and start using the resources right away. That's my impression. So everything from what I read, that is the shortcut. That is the 40%.
Well, and I guess what it's saying is that it will start creating dependent resources at configuration complete time. So if you have B depends on A, okay, so there is some compression going on, but it's not like individual services
correct
their behavior hasn't changed. It's the compression based on the configuration complete, and other dependent resources can start creating themselves.
Well, it's exciting if you can take the trouble of rewriting a bunch of your CloudFormation scripts to leverage as much of this parallel deployment as possible, but it requires work. It's not going to be straightforward. And for a lot of us, and a lot of the CloudFormation scripts that I've actually read, most resource deployments are serial because you think in order of priority. For example, first make sure that the database is up. Don't start the app server unless the database is up and running. Then once the app server is running, then make sure that you have the web server and this is talking to the app server, and the health checks will therefore be satisfied. So there are a sequence of steps that you have in your mind, which is what you encode in your CloudFormation scripts. So unless you've really thought through and figured out how to parallelize a lot of these resource dependencies and deployments, you are not going to be able to leverage that parallelism.
Okay, idea. Take Opus and make a GitHub post-configuration hook or a pre-commit hook that will say parallelize your CloudFormation template.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that's a really good idea.
All right, you heard it here first. All right, let's take a short break, and then we're going to come back with the next news article. Next up for review, CloudWatch Container Insights now delivers observability for NVIDIA GPUs on EKS. Now, you definitely want to monitor those. A cluster of NVIDIA GPUs could get expensive. If there's something wrong, you want to know about it right away. So what kind of metrics would we observe that we'd want to know about on GPUs on EKS?
Okay, this is, again, the compute utilization as well as memory utilization. And increasingly, you're finding that developers prefer using containers as their mechanism of deploying and running workloads now, even with GPUs. So this is really neat. I'm hoping that soon enough, you're going to have the compute optimizer team be able to take these metrics that they've already got for EC2 instances. Now they're doing this for EKS as well, and you'll now be able to see right sizing recommendations for your EKS cluster that is running these kinds of workloads. So again, as we've discussed in the past, including with Rick Cox, who's been here on our show multiple times, the way you actually look at GPU utilization is very different from the way you look at CPU utilization. And so the compute optimizer takes a lot of this knowledge about how GPUs can be optimized. And they use the NVIDIA drivers to basically inspect and capture this information for observability. Now that they have this information, you should be able to optimize your EKS instances as well. So I'm really excited about this overall. Again, as we've discussed in the past, observability insights or these container insights are relatively inexpensive. I believe that if you're under 1 billion, observations, it works out to about 21 cents per million insights, if I'm not mistaken. So it's relatively inexpensive to use and turn on. And I think the savings that you will get from actually running your, or from actually shutting down or resizing your EKS clusters is going to be significantly more than the token amount that you currently spend on these observability metrics.
Yes, these aren't micros and nanos. These are very
Yes.
expensive instances. So you want to make sure, as an example, if your memory is at 0 or your GPU is idling, you'd want to know why. Perhaps you haven't parameterized your jobs correctly. You'd want to know why as soon as possible. Or if there's some problem and you need to shut down that instance, right? It also gives you instance health. If for whatever reason it's not giving you the memory or there's some sort of failure, you want to know about that right away.
Correct.
And with this you can. And like you said, it's a fraction of the cost. And it's exciting to see how this is definitely going to influence Compute Optimizer at some point. And we'll catch up with Rick as soon as we can to figure out what's going on as soon as there's something public.
Sounds
this is
good.
really neat to see.
So I'm going to give this a 4 and a simplifies.
Awesome. It's really exciting to see the things that are going on with EKS. I mean, from the instance selection, and also one thing that I learned as we were writing, with EMR, it's typically single AZ.
Correct.
But if you are running EMR on EKS, you can make it multi-AZ.
Yep.
Now, if you don't want it to be multi-AZ and it happens to be, CloudFix will find that and advise you to bring it back to single AZ. But if you want to take advantage of multi-AZ EMR, you have to do it via EKS. You cannot launch a multi-AZ EMR cluster without EKS. That was a lot of acronyms. But yes, the point is EKS is really neat. You can do a lot of things with it. EKS plus Spot is a killer combination for very structured compute at very low cost. It's exciting the things that can happen there.
Check out our previous episode where we actually talk about how you can deploy EKS on EMR on EKS, and again the CloudFix fixer that helps you get back to a single AZ deployment to be most cost effective.
Yeah, we'll have a link in the description right down there. Have a look at that. Have a link in the description. Lots of great information there. And great background on EMR, EKS, flexible computing. Check out our episode with Lorenzo Winfrey. I believe that's episode 65. Here's a fun one that I thought, we all read Tech Hacker News from time to time. Here's a neat article that popped up, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot of discussions like this. If you have tried GPT-4 Turbo and Claude Opus, what do you prefer? I thought we'd just scroll through, have a look at some of the comments, and see what's your experience. Do you think one is better than the other? What are you seeing? So let's have a look. All right, first one, Claude Opus. GPT-4 gives sensible answers, but takes serious persuading to reduce useful output. Opus can be used as an integral part of an engineering workflow. It only takes 2 or 3 tries to get from an ill-informed query to a working product. I think I'm going to try. I didn't get to use Opus. I used Sonnet for my tolerance tester in OpenSCAD, the one that's printing out right there. And go back to the beginning of this episode if you missed that. I'm going to try doing that with Opus.
Yeah. I think in my experience, I don't know whether it is ChatGPT fatigue or something else, but I sometimes feel like ChatGPT is kind of losing its ability to do well when you have documents uploaded and you want to kind of work with those. It used to be really amazing, and now it's gotten a little worse. I don't know whether it's model updates or something else that they're doing. Opus, all of my initial conversations and interactions with it have actually been really good, especially when it comes to detecting stuff in images, detecting, just working with documents, working with content. It's, charts and interpretations and stuff like that. It's been actually really good at it.
You know what? That's really interesting. So I was using ChatGPT-4 over the weekend. I had a PDF of instructions for a big model that I'm building with my kids, and I wanted to take that PDF of instructions and make a checklist. And so I took a screenshot of the PDF that had that from that model. and I put it into ChatGPT-4, and usually the OCR is pretty good. I said, take out the information in these tables and give me a checklist in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And it didn't do it. And I was a bit surprised at that. And sometimes you wonder, is it just me? Did this work before? But then you look at the ChatGPT subreddit or other discussions and you can see, okay, no, the abilities do change over time.
Yeah, they do change. Like some of the operations that I was able to do with Excel files on using ChatGPT, I mean, sometimes it just starts making big mistakes on very similar operations. I used to get really good accuracy even just 2 or 3 months ago. And now with a bunch of those operations, it started becoming, painful to constantly iterate and keep specifying more and more details to get the same job done. Claude 3, again, Claude 3 Opus is relatively new. I'm still running it through its paces. I have found that it generally does better when it comes to OCR, and reading documents and stuff like that. I think for the other generic stuff, it's been answering, regular English questions. I'd say they are both comparable, but the big difference I've found is in actually reading through documents.
Well, I ended up solving my checklist problem. I never got the answer with ChatGPT-4. I ended up using, if you believe it, an Emacs macro to save the day. Look at this one. Okay, NetSec Burn says Claude 3 Opus by a wide margin. I'm a regular GPT-4 user, tried Claude 2, went into Claude 3 with muted expectations, and was shocked at how much more capable Claude 3 Opus was compared to GPT-4. And so then the response, GPT-4 has been significantly neutered. It's expected it's a combination of model updates that aren't that good. Okay, so we're seeing decrease in capability. Let's see, for coding, another vote for Claude Opus. Let's see. Prefer Claude, but for a non-performance reason. GPT has a writing style that's more recognizable. Claude outputs don't look AI generated. Okay, fair enough. Let's see. What are we seeing here? Claude 3 Opus was more focused. Let's see. Overall, Claude 3 Opus has a clear edge. SASWAT B, Claude by a long shot for coding. The output structure and its quality is better than GPT-4 Turbo in their experience. Another person said Claude over OpenAI. Let's see. This person, okay, first vote for GPT-4 Turbo, better than Claude Opus at learning foreign languages, grammar and syntax.
Interesting.
This one, Claude 3 output is less corporate speak and more to the point. Prefer it over GPT-4. I feel like I'm an adult when talking to Claude. Okay. That's interesting feedback. GPT-4 can go on a tangent quite often. I have found with GPT-4, if you're asking for something esoteric, it can start just giving you generic speak.
Correct.
So I can see. Yeah, that's a really good one. Okay, here's a good custom system prompt. This is funny. I can't believe you can bribe models with imaginary points, but it does work. Let's see. Logical stuff. GPT-4 is still superior, especially for more complex stuff. I like Claude for creating more simple stuff. Interesting. Let's see. Claude. I wonder if they meant Claude, and if differentiated Claude Opus. Lots of votes for Claude Opus. Claude for writing emails. They run all three. Run all three and use the best response. That's interesting. How does that scale? Because
actually, it doesn't really scale. In my experience, unless you have a one-shot prompt, you really can't scale because invariably these conversations end up refining your previous, question or approach, and the refinements differ from model to model. Like when you get back a response from, Claude, the way you would go about optimizing those responses, the is based on the previous answer, right? And if the answers are varied, then the tuning that you're going to do on your prompt is going to be different too, to counter that. So single shot, sure. Multi-shot, not really.
Yeah, the question is time to decision or time to answer from when you first type your question to when you get your answer, and also how pleasant was the experience.
Yeah. So in my experience, there are a couple of tools out there that allow you to run the same query across all the different LLMs, or you can pick 3 to 5. But in my personal experience, I found that beyond the first query, I really struggle. I have to pick one and then optimize to get the answer that I really want.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're having 3 separate conversations. One of them you're giving feedback in this way, another one feedback here. I don't think it's worth
too much.
It's not worth it unless you're asking it like to write copy.
Yeah, the cognitive overhead of that is just too much.
This is interesting. This one said, I've been using GPT-4 daily for coding for 6 months. Claude Opus when it came out. Opus is ahead. Scrolling down, this one prefers GPT-4 because I can have it run Python. Claude doesn't have an interpreter.
Actually, Claude has a code interpreter now. So you can actually have functions and you can have code interpreter. It has the ability to do that. So you actually can do that.
This was funny. Articles written by GPT-4 have some telltale signs, like using the word delve. Right? Let's delve into this. I don't use that word very much in conversation. Maybe I use it in a blog post. Interesting. Okay. Then programming GPT-4 plus, but this person.
Yeah, I think by and large, folks are seeming to like Claude 3 a lot more than GPT. So it definitely seems to be competing well with GPT-4.
Definitely. Now remember, for Claude Opus, you need an Anthropic Pro account.
Correct.
Right? So the Claude Opus, there's no way to use it for free at this point, as far as I know.
Yeah, it is definitely paid, and it is $20 a month plus taxes.
If you had to pick one, which would you pick?
At this point, I actually picked both, because if you really look at it from the standpoint of what am I getting in return for the additional $20, the math that I do is what is my hourly rate and what is the hourly rate for the subscription. So for this particular subscription, if you're looking at a month, it's just a few cents an hour, right?
Yeah.
And what does that few cents an hour do for me, for my hourly rate? I mean, it just increases my productivity by so much that I find it beneficial to subscribe to both. And I do that personally, and I find that both are incredibly beneficial.
Well, let's do a demo of Anthropic Pro to see Claude Opus. Let's do that towards the end of the show. I'd really like to see that. I've got GPT-4, and I'm looking forward to when Opus is on Bedrock. That'll be really neat. You can try Opus without that fixed monthly cost.
Yeah.
So if you're already on AWS, if you're already on Bedrock, that'll be a much easier way to try it out. Hopefully, we'll see that next week.
Yeah, and fundamentally, the difference is you can be an Anthropic subscriber and you can use Claude with the API and Claude Opus with the API calls itself. But if you wanted a chat interface like ChatGPT, then that is the separate subscription. So you have a separate API cost and you have a separate subscription cost for the chat version of Claude 3 Opus.
Yes, the Bedrock playground is not comparable to the full interface that Anthropic is giving you, where you can drag in documents and all those things.
Exactly. Okay, this is going to be fun. We're going to be trying Claude 3 and running it through its paces.
Yes, and I want to set up as a benchmark. You mind if I share my screen? I want to set up as a benchmark.
Let me stop sharing mine. Great.
Now I've got a question that I'm sure many American teenagers have faced, which is you have a budget, you're at Denny's, and you want to figure out how to spend as close to your ceiling as possible without hitting it. And this is an interesting question because it's not a great fit for AI necessarily. It is a good fit for an optimization problem, but I wanted to give it a try. So let me share the screen of what I've given I'm going to give to these AIs. Share screen. Okay, so this should look familiar.
I assume that we are going to be comparing GPT-4
and Claude Opus.
And Claude? Great. Okay.
Okay, so we've got a Denny's menu. It has all kinds of things, descriptions. We've all seen these. All right. So what I want to do, I've given this menu over to GPT-4. I'll switch screens to this, and then I want to ask a question to this, and then I want to see how Claude handles it.
Okay. Should I bring up my...
Oh, here we go. Let me try this one first. So
great.
Let's see. Given a budget of $22, order a variety of food for a good breakfast, but let's see. Get as close to $22 as possible without exceeding it. Produce a table with items, prices, and a total in the bottom row. Okay, let's see if you can do that.
Challenge.
Now, every kid, when you give them a budget at a restaurant, hey, it's a little optimization problem. How do I get close to that budget? I think that it's going to struggle with this, and I may have tested this earlier. Let's see how close it can get.
I am running this very same experiment on Claude at my end, and once you're done with yours, I am going to share my screen, and let's see what it orders.
And so note that while it's doing this, it had to OCR the menu. It had to understand it. So this one, first thing, 2307. So now it's saying...
It already crossed it.
Yes.
Yep. And by the way, I see that it's not really doing a table.
Maybe it will try it at the end.
Possible. Let's see what it does. By the way, with what I'm seeing on Claude 3, I'm just blown away.
And so this would typically fall under a constrained optimization problem, right? And typically how you do this is you'd set up a list of items, and you'd have a 0 or 1 for each one, and then multiply by your price. And so the 0 or 1 are your decision variables. Should I order this or not? Or maybe there's something on the menu that costs $1, and the ideal strategy would be to order exactly 22 of those things. Or if they found some even number, like a $2 item.
Okay. So it came back with $17.97.
So if you offer your kid this budget, they're not going to leave $4 on the table.
Exactly. So take a look at what Opus came up with.
All right, let's have a look.
Well, I'm going to present my screen over here. Okay, so this is Opus. One shot. Came up with a table. And came up with 2217. Let's see if I can zoom in. There we go. Okay. And the thing I liked about this was it got straight to the answer without being overly verbose. It presented the table, which is what was being requested. And it came to 22.17, which is pretty close, I'd say. And it explicitly says the total comes to 22.17, just slightly over, but this is the closest combination to 22 based on the menu prices provided without removing any items.
Okay, so then I think what I want to do as an exercise, I want to try this for a blog post, is I want to try this in a traditional optimizer and see how close you can get with, say, like the Excel solver. Because the Excel solver, this would be a good problem for the Excel solver. Would be to see how close to $22 could you get without exceeding $22. Now, if you tell it...
It's strictly, I'm just going to see if strictly equal to or less than $22. Let's see what it comes up with. It got closer. It got to 1858.
But it could have thrown in a T. No, how much is a T? A T is $3.89.
Yeah.
No, so that would have put you over.
No, that would have been off. Can we just double check the prices
Well-
here? Let me bring up the PDF. Or do you want to just share your screen with the PDF?
Yeah.
I just want to confirm the prices. I'm going to stop sharing here. And so I want to make sure that it actually picked up all the prices correctly. So the original Grand Slam is $14.39. Oh, I have a follow-up question I want to do right after this. Can you look for the original Grand Slam?
That's the Grand Slam pack.
Original Grand Slam $14.39. It picked that one up correctly. Stack of Pancakes is $4.19.
Ooh, stack of a couple of stacks here. Full
Stack of
All right.
Pancakes there, $4.19. That's absolutely correct. And eggs at $3.59.
Oh yeah, one exact match, one egg.
Egg. Okay, so here's what I'm going to try now next. I'm going to present my screen. Again. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I want to now say, can you recommend an order for a vegetarian?
So this is interesting. It has to know what vegetarian is. It has to
Yeah.
see how that applies. And it kept that budget in the context window. What is the Fit Slam?
Yeah, let's check out what the Fit Slam is. And it came up, hey, this is 2137, which is actually closer to 22 than the other two options.
All right. And, okay, Fit Slam is indeed vegetarian. Egg whites, spinach, grape tomatoes. Oh, no. It has turkey bacon strips.
Which one has turkey bacon strips? The Fit Slam?
The Fit Slam. But it acknowledges that. See that? It says, while turkey bacon isn't vegetarian, you can ask for it to be removed.
Ah.
That's pretty
That's
good.
smart, actually. That's pretty good. Yeah. This I mean, I think in general, I've found Claude 3 to be a lot more precise, a lot more to the point when it comes to, looking at this kind of data and getting you the answer that you specifically asked. Again, there are optimizations and stuff like that. In general, like I said before, LLMs aren't really that great at math. And you really want to use what are called functions to work with your LLM that they can reach out to actually do the math that you need. And they can fill in the parameters, during the conversation or during their processing. So that's the way you want to go about doing this, not letting the LLM actually do raw math. But that said, this is still pretty close.
Here's an interesting idea. I'm going to try asking ChatGPT. Okay, so I would say formulate the problem as a linear program that can be solved with the Gurobi solver. So now what you'd want to do is have an agent that recognizes that this is an optimization problem. And so now this is starting to formulate it precisely. Okay, so this is what I said. It would make binary decision variables for each one. There's an objective function. There we go. So now we're saying we're maximizing this objective function. And it is, we have a constraint, which is it's less than. Now this
how many items did it have on the menu that it actually used?
It only used 6.
Okay, so I have a version that used 7, and I wonder why it just used that few.
Interesting.
It should have used a lot more.
And the other thing that it said, which this is a constraint that it invented, was that each item can be selected at most once. Whereas when you use these optimization problems, sometimes you do it and you just order 22 $1 coffees, for example.
Got it. Yeah.
And so it assumed that. I didn't tell it to.
So finally, I've got to present my screen over here. The constraints that Claude 3 picked up are quite different. So take a look at this. It actually picked up 7 items, and I assume that all the other items are either greater than or equal to $22. That's why I didn't pick them. That would be my assumption. But I assume that there are more than 7 items that are under 22 on that it's very massive menu. Anyway, looking at the objective function, it kind of got it maximized. That makes sense. Budget constraints should be less than or equal to 22. That makes sense. Here it says that each variable should either be 0 or 1. So it can only be selected one. Oh, sorry, it can only be selected once. Main dish constraint, only one main dish can be selected. I don't know why I brought that up. And side dish constraint is at most 3 side dishes can be selected. This is interesting.
So
maybe it's still sticking with the vegetarian menu. What would the formulation if you took out the constraint, yes. Let's see what that comes to. Okay, so it does pick up more items. It went up to 11. And you said OpenAI or GPT-4 only picked
7.
6.
6,
right? Yeah. That's not bad at all in terms of a formulation.
So now this is giving you the mathematical formulation. So now what I've asked mine to do is give me a program using the LP solve library in C to actually try and solve this. Having a look at what it's doing. I'll need to try and see if I can compile this and run this. That's the part that's going to take forever.
No, this is a linear programming problem. It should actually be really fast.
Oh no, what I meant is downloading the right libraries, getting everything set up. The compilation and setup is going to take 2 seconds.
Here's a Python PULP library to solve this problem.
Oh, much better. I'm going to ask for the same
thing.
Oh,
much neater. That's pretty neat. Nice. Pip install pulp. And I'd say that's a pretty crisp formulation. What's GPT-4 doing?
It's actually pretty good. I'll put this back on screen.
Yeah, let me stop sharing here.
Okay, and this is strange. I asked it, I said, use everything on the menu.
How many items did it pick?
Gave me, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I wonder why it's hesitating.
Yeah, it picked 11 with Claude 3 as well.
And it gave me a vector of their prices. Then it set up the problem, named it breakfast menu selection, gave me a list of decision variables, which are in 0 and 1. created an objective function, which is, so this is what you'd call the dot product, the sum
Right.
of quantity times price. This would be the dot product. Then gave a constraint of the dot product must be less than 22, as that's my budget.
Not bad.
No.
I might be a little biased, but I feel like the Claude 3 version is a little more readable.
I wonder if it's going to do this, because it should be able to run some Python.
Claude 3 doesn't yet run any Python. You can write separate Python programs and run them, but it doesn't natively run.
All right, let's see if this finishes. And I think this is a good experiment, because we're highlighting a few things, right? This is, again, this expert level knowledge. We can ask the problem directly, and that's a bit outside of its sphere. We can say, formulate it as a mathematical problem, and you can say, okay, this is exposing all of the embedded decisions in this question. And then you could say, give me a optimization program in Python using, in this case, PULP or pulp. And okay, so ChatGPT can run it directly.
Yeah, this is probably one of those libraries that uses NumPy under the hood, and because it's NumPy and a bunch of other C libraries, it's not going to be able to install the binaries. It's probably one of those binaries that require local compilation.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's going to call out to BLAS or LAPACK under the hood.
Yeah, correct.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this is good. So if we wanted to make an optimal breakfast order, we now at least are armed with a Python program, all from an OCR scan of the menu. But we can see that we still need to have an idea of what the approach is to take. Okay, this is a linear program. We want to solve this. There are certain assumptions, and even the assumption that you can't order negative menu items.
Yeah.
Because then it had to figure that out, that was a constraint. Because otherwise you could basically adjust the price with infinite granularity through having these negative menu items that offset. You could basically find every single, like if you had one item that was $3.88 and another one that was $3.89, then you have 1 cent increments and you can get to any number you want to.
Correct. So I mean, I still feel like the LLMs have a way to go, but I think the rate of improvement that you're seeing over here is just absolutely fascinating. Open source model like Claude 3 is now, operating in lockstep with GPT-4 in terms of its capability is absolutely awesome. So I think we have a long way to go, and now it becomes even more interesting with more players in the field of achieving topmost outcomes.
So how would you solve this? You could use parse the menu, give me the standard format.
Yeah.
You could have another tool which says, okay, given a class of problems, recognize when they are linear programs and format them according to pulp. You could have a toolkit which has access to which is running pulp, and maybe you can run it as an API and can solve these problems for you and give them back to the agent. The agent you could have a checker agent to make sure that the solution is indeed feasible and that there's no strange outcomes like 22 cups of coffee.
Right.
And then you could have a presentation agent that made a nice table and a PDF for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do it with one agent that makes a single call to an LLM, gets back the formulation from the menu or whatever you're choosing, and then actually executes the linear programming optimization. And that would probably be the simplest way to execute this. If I were doing this, I would just run a notebook with a simple call to Opus, where I get a list of all the menu items, I get the formulation, and I then execute the code that comes back from the formulation.
The key insight, which is where I hope that we get to with LLMs, is that they would say, oh, we recognize that this isn't a constrained optimization problem. Here's the path that you should take to solve this.
Yeah.
Whereas unless we told it to do that, it wouldn't just have figured that out. And what it was doing under the hood with different heuristics, we have no idea.
Correct. And I think that's where it boils down to what kind of prompting, what are you asking of the LLM to do? My general guideline is if the underlying computation requires math, you're probably better off doing it yourself as a function. But for all other general knowledge and language skills, you can rely pretty heavily on the LLM to actually give you good answers.
Yeah. And I think we'll get to that point where we'll figure out, what are you really asking?
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
If you're asking, and humans do that a lot, right? We're asking X, but we're really asking Y.
Yeah. And remember that you do need to also make sure that you have checks and balances in place as you're dealing with these LLMs. I'll give you a very simple example. As we were talking, I actually asked Opus to give me a list of all the items on the menu with the price less than or equal to 22. And it actually has a huge list over here. You've got breakfast items, you've got sides and add-ons, you've got drinks, you've got all of the stuff, which it didn't consider. In the original formulation, it only picked 11 items, and I don't know why. So you need to make sure that you have all the right checks and balances in place as you're creating these formulations or as you're getting back answers from the LLM. They aren't perfect. They're not always going to give you all the right answers. You have to read through them, and you have to be the supervisor, making sure that the data that you're getting back is accurate.
Definitely. Well, I think this will be a fun example to build upon for future blog posts. Maybe we can do one that demonstrates the usage of agents and tools and toolkits to show how we really optimize this order. All right. Well, let's get some breakfast. I think we're about ready to wrap up the show. We have one more segment, which is our CloudFix Finder Fixer. All right. I wanted to present our CloudFix Finder Fixer. Okay. We have the RDS end of life and EKS end of life. So this one is quite interesting. I want to share a screen about the RDS and the RDS pricing and the EKS end of life pricing. Let me present my screen here. There we go. Okay, so the idea of RDS and EKS end of life is that once RDS or EKS has reached the end of the community support, whether you're on MySQL or Postgres, you can still get extended support via AWS. And in fact, if we look at this blog post, you are automatically enrolled in RDS extended support. So if you are like many organizations, you end up with many databases floating around. There's, of course, production ones, but then you've got dev, test, staging, UAT, people's different projects, experiments, various internal services, and they can all be on versions of RDS. Now, what you won't want to do is pay for these extended support contracts. So you get automatically enrolled. Let's have a look at the pricing. They're actually a little bit on the expensive side. So if you go to my RDS MySQL pricing, for example, you can look at RDS extended support costs, and these are the per vCPU hour pricing. So what we've done with CloudFix is that we will automatically scan your account at an AWS organization level. Then we will find every single RDS instance and EKS instance that is close to or at the end of life and going to be enrolled in extended support. So that way you can make an informed decision on, is that something you want to do, or do you want to upgrade that to the next version where you're not needing extended support. So in addition to saving that cost, it's also a good idea to upgrade versions when you can. Okay, let me take you through the CloudFix screen and I can show you what that looks like. Give me 1 second here. I will present some slides. There we go. Okay, my slides are uploading. Here it is. Okay, so when you log into the CloudFix console, there's an advanced pane. We have several different finders and fixers we have more than 50 finders and fixers. They go into various categories. Advanced is best performed in the maintenance window. And then one of these advanced finders you look here is the RDS and EOS optimize end of life. So that's optimizing making you aware that you're RDS or EKS instances are about to go to end of life, and you're going to be automatically enrolled in these extended support. So this, when you click on the RDS Optimize EOL version, you are automatically shown this screen, and it's going to show you, I've blurred out some of the account numbers here. I'll scroll over how much you can save per each instance. Now, this is a very big account. They have some very big RDS databases, so there's a lot to be saved. The biggest, these are sorted biggest to smallest, so that way you can kind of prioritize. So there's a database here that's going to rack up $23,000 in annualized costs just for the extended support. And that means if you went to the trouble to upgrade it to the next major version that's still supported, you wouldn't need to pay that cost. CloudFix is going to scan your entire organization, find that for you, and then it'll show you the potential savings associated with it. And then there you go. You can see, okay, here's a minor version. This database is currently on Aurora MySQL 2.11. And if you upgrade to 2.12, you will not have that extended support and the associated costs. All right, well, that is, and this is similar for EKS on Optimize EOL. That's how this one works. Okay, so what you should do, if you're interested, go to cloudfix.com. Let me put this on my screen. Go over to cloudfix.com and get a free savings assessment. Let me put that on the screen here. If you go to cloudfix.com/assessment, you can sign up for free. Oh, wait, let me get the right tab on here. There we go. Yeah, you can sign up for free, cloudfix.com/assessment. You can sign up for free, scan your account, see all the possible savings. And then, of course, myself, Rahul, or any of our wonderful colleagues would love to chat with you to help you save on your AWS costs. All right, well, I'll turn it back over to Rahul, and let's wind out the show.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that has been a long episode. It's really been interesting to figure out exactly what breakfast we can order. I'm a bit hungry now. I know, Rahul, it's your evening, but
I am going to have
a
to
plan
get
for
to dinner
tomorrow
right away. Absolutely. Anyway, this has been so much fun. There's so much more we have to cover about Claude 3, GPT-4, hopefully 5 or 4.5 based on the rumors. Let's see what comes up, and looking forward to doing more with these LLMs. So stay tuned. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get your feedback, and let us know what you want us to talk about.
All right. Have a good week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix is AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost-saving opportunities, and not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the button to start saving now.